Hello and welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast. We believe thoughtful people and thoughtful software will change the world for the better. This podcast is all about diving into new technology and discussing industry trends, but more importantly, we are passionate about helping people be better at what they do. This is the focus of what we call thoughtful software. Our guest on the Thoughtful Software Podcast is business-centric technology leader Michael Keithley. Michael Keithley is the Chief Information Officer at United Talent Agency. UTA is one of the biggest talent agencies in the world. Michael has over 25 years of experience in the information technology field. He was named one of the top 100 CIO, CTO leaders in 2015, and we are so grateful to have him on the show today. We hope you enjoy this discussion on technology, leadership, and innovation. Here's Andrew Fahad and Michael Keithley.
Mark Andreessen pointedly said many years ago that software is eating the world, and that's every industry and company essentially will have to, be involved in software. So when we talk about a non-tech company, what do we mean by that?
Well, first of all, software is eating the world. Mark Andreessen said that in 2011, and it's been one of the seminal moments in my life and career in the realization of what that really meant. And I think it's as true today as it's ever been. But to me, when I think about, kind of the difference between a quote unquote tech company and a non-tech company, I kind of go back even before, Mark wrote that op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. And I think way back to a guy named Nicholas Negroponte who founded the Media Lab at MIT. And he came up with a book called Being Digital, where his fundamental premise was the difference between bits and atoms. And when you think about most tech companies, they're either all software or primarily software based. And not only does that have a lot of cultural differences, valuing, speed and kind of agility and some of the things that kind of come from the Silicon Valley tech company world, the fact that your product is software, and that's bits, there's unique properties. They can flow over the internet freely. They have zero marginal cost. They have network effects. There's a bunch of these kind of properties that tech companies have grown up with that non-tech companies don't have and don't have a history or value that as much. And I think, if I'm generalizing, non-tech companies are typically work and have dealt with the physical world where, atoms make up these physical, tangible objects that typically have SKUs and there are costs associated with them. And there's more friction with atom-based businesses than bit-based businesses. And, even companies like us who represent people, or whether you're manufacturing widgets or part of a supply chain or what have you, I think it's just fundamentally different challenges than tech companies have. And while I agree 100% that all companies need to be software first and software is in the world, I just think that non-tech companies are kind of later to the party, and they have a lot of legacy culture and the way that things, business has always been done, whether it's supply chains or distribution models or what have you, that create friction, and whereas tech companies just don't have that out of the gate.
It's really interesting you say that. It's like the classic innovator's dilemma, right? You want to be a tech company, you want to have the margins, you want all of that, but you can't really do the same thing a tech company does. And it's funny to actually start seeing the innovator's dilemma play out in software. I think the prime example of it has been chat. A few years ago, HipChat was the greatest thing ever invented. And now everyone uses Slack. I guess Teams is the new thing. I saw that there are more active daily users on Teams than there is Slack, but somehow I don't know any company really using Teams. So I don't know where that number comes from, but you can see it. I think tech companies can disrupt tech companies quicker than non tech companies can disrupt each other. I think that that's a true statement across history. But now tech companies are going after non-tech companies too. Google's building phones now. It's just an interesting time to be alive.
It really is, and I think the common thread through all those things is speed, and disruption, and Clayton Christensen's whole theory there. Software is enabling that to happen so much faster now, whereas non-tech companies historically had kind of the luxury of time, and there are lots of moats and barriers that they could establish that as the incumbents. They had those advantages, and those are going away with software.
So companies like Tesla, though, right? One of their competitive advantages is software, right? I don't think fundamentally they build a better car than Bugatti or anyone that would be in the same class of a Porsche, if you will. But they do have a better experience. They're software driven. They can push an update to your car that makes it faster. And that's an absurd statement because Porsche can't do that, right? They're bound by mechanisms, the petrol engine combustion based, and they can't just push an update that makes the combustion engine more efficient or faster, but you can for a motor. Do you think people are starting, electric cars are obviously a theme, so I'm not some great thought leader thinking that Porsche now has to kind of adopt the same strategy that Tesla has. So how does Porsche become Tesla, right? Tesla has Elon Musk, who led and founded many tech companies, so he understands software, but Porsche hasn't done that. How do they do that?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the Tesla analogy. Just this morning, I was reading an article that Motor Trend said that the Model S has been the most influential car in the last 70 years. And, they always do the car of the year. And it won the car of the year. And they interviewed Elon Musk and the designer. And they said that fundamentally, when they decided to do Tesla, they said it was a computer on wheels. I always called it a phone on wheels, but a computer on wheels, same thing. And they said when you look at it from first principles, and that's the goal that you're trying to achieve, things like over-the-air connectivity and software being able to add features is just a no-brainer. And that's because they took it from that, it's a computer with wheels mindset instead of the historical, automotive industry. And they were shocked. He thought that he being Elon, he thought within 3 years, all of Detroit and Germany and all the establishment would see the value of over-the-air updates and would have implemented that. And here we are 10 years later. And while they're starting to make little, noise around the edges with doing that, still they haven't done it over 10 years. And a decade in the software world or the tech world is eons, And it was fascinating. So I think it's really interesting that you bring that up as an article. As far as Porsche, and how they're going to do that, it kind of reminds me of closer to the entertainment world when, Reed Hastings says, our challenge is we have to be HBO faster than HBO becomes Netflix. And I think that the analogy is very similar for Porsche. Fundamentally, they have to change pretty much everything about culture and company and the silos and how they think about everything else to think about it as a computer with wheels as opposed to a car that's an electric car.
I think that's very interesting, right? We usually call that very poorly branded, but we call it digital transformation, right? They have to become a digital company, but that's a lot easier said than done. I don't think the car companies don't realize that they're losing to Tesla. I think they're abundantly aware that the Model 3 is one of the best selling cars of all time. It's flying off the lots. Literally, they just can't make enough of them to meet demand. Ford can't say the same thing about the Focus, right? And so I know Ford CEO is looking at it and saying they're eating my lunch and yet still can't do it. And they've spent billions on innovation labs, on bringing in consulting companies, and they just have not been able to crack it. Not from a lack of trying, I'm sure. If anything, GM might be the closest company to cracking it, and they're pretty far off. So how do you make the digital transformation work, especially when the fundamental value your business delivers is non-digital, right? Cars certifiably, unless it's Tesla, aren't digital products. So how do you transform that? I mean, you just have all the powers pulling away from that investment, telling you to invest more and more into obviously a dying business model.
I think it's really, really hard, to be honest. And I don't profess to have a game plan for how you could do digital transformation. But I think that even using the word digital transformation, it's somewhat of a loaded word in that, for me, digital transformation is leveraging digital tools to fundamentally change or transform a business. And we're talking about the automotive business right now. But it's really, that leveraging these digital tools to radically change. And I don't just mean, I mean like exponential change in, either business models or processes or customer centricity in their products and services. And that's where I think, Elon fundamentally did that. And it's really hard for the rest of the guys to kind of turn that aircraft carrier. It's almost like you got these little speedboats running circles around the aircraft carrier, and it's just really hard to turn around. And, you mentioned Ford. I know that the CEO is saying we're a mobility company, and they're really trying to change the mindset of what they are. But you've got quote unquote car guys that have been doing this for years and love that the roar of the engine and the mythology of it, and all those things. And so it's really hard to transform. But I think you've got to use technology to just radically improve, once again, all those things, the business models or customer centricity, and really thinking about it from the customer's view backwards. And going back to Tesla, I bought my Tesla on an Alaska Airlines flight on my iPad on the way to Seattle. That's where I actually clicked buy, okay? And the whole fundamental difference of the user experience of being able to go on the website and create a profile and do a bunch of, do I want this feature or that one or this color or all those kinds of things, and finally saying buy, as opposed to going down to a car dealership and having that whole experience. I think Elon thought about it end to end. What would delight the customer, and then he from first principles built that solution. And you see some of their challenges at Tesla. Once again, I'm glad you brought it up as an analogy. They look at the challenges they're having with dealers, and there's still some states today that won't allow them to sell in their state because the dealers are so powerful and they have such a monopoly in the politics of that state that they're resisting it. But it's resistance is futile when the future fundamentally better way of doing things.
How important is leadership in this case? Because you have a lot of these old traditional companies that seem to be talking about digital transformation, but it's really just playing catch up. And then you have companies like Tesla that are just leaping bounds and forward. So how important is this to have like a person like Elon Musk who has this mindset, as opposed to like a traditional, just an old CEO that's kind of just like chugging along?
I think that's a great question. I think leadership is absolutely paramount to even having a chance to do digital transformation. And when I think about who, recently in recent times has really fundamentally transformed a company, I think about Satya Nadella at Microsoft. And while Ballmer was a great manager and he was very successful in kind of one era, I don't think he or his leadership team ever could have, even if they wanted to, whether they hired consultants or how they came up with the exact same policies that Satya ultimately rolled out. But his leadership and his ability to kind of understand where he wanted to go and have the vision and articulate that vision consistently over time, and doing the right things with incentives of the existing salespeople and moving to the cloud, and just so many things he did was amazing. But without a leader that's fundamentally different, I can't think of any existing successful leader that kind of has made that pivot and gone forward. Look at some of the challenges that Facebook is having right now, and it'd be interesting to look back in history. Was Zuckerberg able to kind of like pivot and have a new grand age of Facebook, or would it take somebody else or some other leader to do that. And it's fascinating, but it's a good question. And I really think leadership is absolutely critical.
Andrew, you had something?
Story's not relevant, but it's fine now. A little aside here. So Harley Davidson, they're trying to pivot to electronic bikes, and you ask any Harley owner, and they'll tell you, no effing way I'm getting on one of those pansy electric bikes. You can't pay me enough. It's got to roar. It's got to have that Harley sound,
Yep.
And so they designed it, and they literally didn't tell the people it was electric, and they had users test it. And what they did was they put electronic rumblers in there. So you sat down, it felt like you were on a real bike. And they added a sound augmentation. So it had a subwoofer and things like that on it. And they say, hey, go ahead, take this on the thing. Like, this bike's amazing. It's transformative. It has, just like a Tesla, instantaneous torque. It just goes. I can't believe how great this is. And they told everyone that's an electric bike. And it's just a phenomenal story that people don't know if you don't tell them. The courts are not looking under the thing. They designed it like an engine. And I think it's powerful in the sense of, what you have to do to change minds. But it's a great story of people really investing what their customers care about, listening to them, giving them what they want, but also moving the world forward with technology.
And Andrew, that I think is a great example of this customer centricity view and you think about like design thinking and just some of the really starting with the customer and working backwards. That's a great story of delivering something that the customer really wants, even though they don't know it's fundamentally a completely different product that they thought they never would want.
Yeah, well, and I think it's easier with software, right? I can build something in an hour, show it to a customer, they can play around with it, I can iterate on it, show it to them again, and get a lot of quick iterations. But a physical product, I have to prototype it, and there's new technologies, 3D printing and all of that to make that easier. But for the longest time, I had to build a product which was expensive, design it, take it to a customer, have them tell me it was awful, and then go back and redesign it again. And the iteration cycles could literally kill companies if they weren't building good things. And if you look at historically, the people that have done the best in hardware have had great product thinkers. Your GEs with their historic line of great executives, your Steve Jobs, right? They've just been good at knowing what people want and not necessarily always asking them. And how many great product thinkers are there on the planet? Steve Jobs, we can name them. That's how great they are, versus just normal everyday people, tasked to deal with that. It's hard. It's hard to be customer centric when it costs millions of dollars to do so.
And going back to the Tesla discussion, one of the delightful things about owning a Tesla is getting new features and functionality, and compare that with kind of the historical Detroit thing. As soon as you drove it off the lot, you lost value and you're frozen in time. And so as whatever the mapping or display system is in your car, as Google Maps keeps innovating or Apple Maps keeps innovating or whatever mapping system you want, you're falling farther and farther behind. Whereas if it's software like Tesla, they can continue to innovate. And then also if a competitor or some other place inspires you about something great with software, you can replicate that fast, easily replicate that. Look at Snap and Facebook and kind of where that's all played out. And so if it's in software, you have flexibility and you can keep the product fresh. You can add new features, you can innovate, you can keep making it better and better. If it's in hardware, you're kind of stuck.
Well, that was one of the hardest things of when I worked at an ATM manufacturer. There were fundamental things that they had to do in their hardware. Their software didn't matter as much. They ended up trying to compete in both and doing neither as good as they could have. With hardware, it's much more difficult. But if Maps is beating me, if Google Maps is beating me on my mapping part of my software, I can always integrate Google Maps and then use that. And now I have the same experience. And it might cost me a little more money. I might squeeze my margins a tiny bit. My margins are so high already, right? Instead of having 80% margins, I have 75% margins. And ask any hardware company if they wanted 75% margins and they'd all sign up. It's crazy.
Going back to the original tech company versus non-tech company, tech companies believe in platforms and network effects and APIs. And your example of Google Maps, I can just integrate that. You can, because that's a API based thing, and you can do a composable app and integrate that. Most companies and industries historically would never do that. They would never they would never see the wisdom of opening up their platform to create a standard. They would want to keep that proprietary and view that in a completely different way.
On that topic, for a non-tech company, what would you recommend, like in terms of trying these new features or new technologies? I think the distinction that we should make is the difference between digital innovation and digital transformation. Like how do you try new things and kind of like push the boundaries so that you can adopt it later?
I think you've got to look to Silicon Valley, not literally Silicon Valley, but kind of the tech world, to see what they're doing, and non-technology companies try to adopt a lot of that. And really, an awful lot of that is around speed, and agility and flexibility to do things. So it depends on what kind of business you're in. But if you're really trying to innovate, you look at that. And that's why I spend a lot of time up on Sand Hill Road with the venture capitalists and try to understand what they're funding, what they're thinking, what the new companies are coming down the road, because that gives me more lead time to really try to incorporate those technologies or processes or ideas or whatever it is into my business. And the sooner I do that, I have a longer period of deriving competitive advantage before the other guys get it. And I remember many, many, many years ago when the BlackBerry was a thing. Before BlackBerry, it was a company called Bell South that was contracting with Research in Motion to make those. And once I saw the potential of, in essence, what became mobile email, we adopted that at a company I was at before. And we had this long window of competitive advantage where nobody else had it until that became a thing. And once that technology became a thing, everybody had it. And it wasn't, you had to move on to the next thing. So I think for companies that are non-tech companies that are looking to really innovate or transform, I think it's really important that you try to see where, kind of, as Wayne Gretzky says, skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it is. And in order to do that, I look mostly to Silicon Valley.
So it's interesting, though. We see a lot of different projects come across our desk and a lot of fear. I'm talking to executives, not always technology executives. They're afraid, and they're afraid of the build versus buy solution. They just don't get it, right? There's all these solutions on the market, and why don't I just buy one? And then you have the same talk I give everyone. Is it a core competency? Because if it is, you should build it. If it's not, then yeah, go buy Salesforce, go buy whatever SaaS solution that might exist, because that's going to pay dividends for you down the road because you don't need anything specialized. But there's still fear, right? Projects fail at an alarmingly high rate. Software is hard, as we all know. What would you tell those people, right? Obviously, it's a big investment. These things are not cheap at the enterprise level. We're talking multi-million-dollar investments usually, whether you're building or buying. And it could literally make your company incredibly successful, or it could set you back years if you make the invalid investment.
That's a great question, and quite honestly, when I speak with my fellow CIOs, like this is one of the fundamental things that maybe there's misunderstanding around, and that's, you're right, it is a fear-based thing, that build versus buy, and I know that the pendulum of all software used to be custom back in the day. And then there was, all the failures you were talking about and kind of all the outsourcing things that happened, and then the big consulting firms. And so there's an aversion to doing custom developed software. But I have a really simple philosophy on how I make those trade-offs and those decisions on build versus buy. And it's, Jeffrey Moore had a great book, and he was talking about, core versus context. And if it's something that's core to your business, that fundamentally differentiates your business from everybody else, I write custom software for that. That's where I can innovate. That's where I can really differentiate us and give us competitive advantage. And there are very few areas that that's the case. Everything else is context, and everything else you want to buy off the shelf. This also includes infrastructure. So this is why the cloud is better than having your own data centers. But in buying it, now we're lucky that with the state of the industry and the cloud and the internet, and et cetera, there are best of breed SaaS solutions. So would I write my own word processor? Of course not. Would I write my own HR package? I could, but it's not going to give me competitive advantage. I'm going to go with Workday, whatever the best of breed of that category is. And you can go right down the line, whether it's an ERP system. And ironically, I think Elon is the only one that wrote his own ERP system. But there's no reason to do that. So for the vast majority of all of the computing stuff that's out there, you do, in my opinion, you do best of breed SaaS solutions. Now you have to have your identity infrastructure and your security infrastructure and some other things, your master data, all modern architecture to make this happen. But it's all best of breed SaaS solutions, and that gives you so many advantages. And then those few areas that truly that differentiate your business, that's where you invest in custom software. That's where you can change the game. That's where you can create potentially a platform, depending on what business you're in, and make it very difficult for competitors to keep up with you.
Yeah. Once we've convinced them that they need some level of custom software, because you said, we're not here to sell you Salesforce, nor do we want to build CRMs. That's not what we're in the business doing, unless you need a CRM, in which case we do. But the thing that comes after that is the fear of acceleration. And what I mean by that is, like 6 years ago, a lot of CIOs started investing in virtual machines. Those are going to be the future. They're going to save you money. You get one machine, you're running 9 servers on it. Life is so good. And now there's Kubernetes, there's Docker, there's serverless, and people are just frankly like, I just got done investing in VMware. I just got done investing in moving to the cloud, and now I have to do more. I have to run Docker. Well, what advice would you give them about that fear of if I invest now, I might lose out on the next trend?
Well, I think it's very analogous to what I was saying before. You've got to figure out where the trends are going. And at a certain point in time, virtualization made all the sense in the world. And, there were huge economic and agility advantages and cost advantages to virtualizing. And so when you do that, but then you don't rest on your laurels, and you need to, once again, go up to Silicon Valley and find out, oh, wow, there's this microservices thing going that's starting to build up steam. And there's this thing called Docker and Kubernetes for managing it, and continuous delivery, and all these, modern ways that the tech companies in Silicon Valley were moving en masse from virtualization to that. And as long as you have enough lead time, you can plan, your budgets and your strategies and your skill sets of the people and all the things that you need to do that. But I agree with you, Andrew. I see so many of my peers that just said, gosh, I just spent the last decade moving over to VMware virtualization. I can't abandon that now. And then they fall into kind of a mindset where they're trying to rationalize that in the new world. And I think that's what a lot of, the vendors also are doing that. So the VMwares of the world, I don't want to pick on them, but, pick any vendor. When the cloud starts to become a thing, or when Docker and containers and microservices become a thing, they try to adapt that. And this is when you say, oh, it's not a data center anymore. That's your private cloud. And now you have a hybrid cloud between this and that. And you can still have your old, way of doing things and embrace the new things. And it's all just basically a bunch of marketing hooey. Either you anticipated that shift from physical to virtual to containers and microservices, or you didn't, and you gotta understand that, be able to surf that wave to get all the advantages that new upcoming wave has.
There was an unbelievable amount of CISOs that were telling me that the cloud, when AWS came out, was never going to catch on. No one ever put their data in a public cloud. You're out of your mind. What are you thinking? And I'm like, just wait, Amazon's going to be $1 billion business. And no one believed me. And I'm like, now they're an unstoppable juggernaut. And you're insane to start any project and not put it on AWS, Azure, or GCP, or any of the public clouds. Why would you have your own data center at this point? Seems irresponsible.
And just think about it logically. If you're a CISO, AWS or Azure or Google Compute Platform, they have the scale that they have, the capital investment they have, and the ability to hire thousands or tens of thousands of security people. There's no way as a private enterprise you could do that. I mean, maybe a Fortune 50 company might have the resources to be able to kind of play in that world, but even them, they can't. And so security, if you just thought about it logically, maybe not on day one, but certainly X time into it, was going to be way better than you could deliver in your on-prem world.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is probably the most important part of our discussion. And I guess my question is, are people then just underestimating how rapidly technology is changing?
I think absolutely. And the pace of change is accelerating. It's getting faster, right? And if you don't fundamentally understand that, going back to my skate to where the puck is going to be, Wayne Gretzky analogy, every day that goes by, you have to figure out ways to anticipate and react faster, right? And consumer expectations, in enterprises, we used to, as a CIO, in the IT department, I was kind of judge, jury, and executioner on what technology you were going to use. And people didn't know any better, and they had to deal with it. It's the IBM mainframe or whatever I gave them. And, once the smartphone and kind of the cloud digital world started to happen, people started to realize, hey, I can have a smart, intuitive interface, and I can have really low switching costs. So if I get, think about like weather apps or something, you get one app and your friend says, hey, there's this new great one. We go to the app store, it's free, or 99 cents. You download it, you try it out, you might use it for a while, you might switch to another one. And it's really intuitive. There's no need for like manuals or attending trading classes or anything like that. And so consumer expectations and consumer tech so rapidly overtook enterprise tech that I think that's a huge underlying force for driving all this change. And it goes back to that, really looking at it from the customer's point of view and then backing into the technology solution instead of the other way around. Historically in IT, we've always said, I'm going to run app X on machine Y, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And that's just not the case anymore. And I don't see those drivers of that the pace of change and the acceleration of that pace of change slowing down.
I actually think one of the core problems that present itself is the way tech companies fund projects versus how non-tech companies fund projects. From a perspective of a tech company, we're used to saying, okay, we'll put $30,000 aside, go do this proof of concept. All right, here's another 100,000, take it to an MVP. Here's a 200,000 thing, add these features that customers requested. But they're constantly making you earn the money instead of just giving it to you. And at non-tech companies, they're used to saying, oh, we need to refab our plant. Okay, here's $4 billion, go refab our plant. And big bang entitlement funding, right? And if you look how startups are funded, I think the startup scene is ridiculous right now because of the amount of capital available. But historically, it's always been, hey, you need to get traction. You need to take this startup and you need to get some traction, and then I'll give you a seed round. And once I give you a seed round, you need to get some revenue, and then I'll give you a Series A, B, C, take the company public. But you had to earn those rounds and get traction to do that. And obviously there's things like growth hacking and all that. I just don't see non-tech companies changing the way they're funding these projects, and it's causing them to fail. Like if you gave me $3 billion tomorrow, I'm going to be deeply appreciative of it. But like I can't plan a $3 billion project, and nor can anyone do it. It's too big, it's too large. You need to break it down. And that's how you make tech successful. I think the mindset has to change and say, we're going to start funding IT projects the same way other tech companies fund their projects.
Boy, that's a really important thing that you've kind of stumbled upon here, Andrew, and it's one of the challenges that I have. So much of enterprise, the way that they've always worked, is around the board governance and quarterly reporting and annual budget cycles and 3 to 4 to 5 to 10-year strategic plans, and there's all this inertia. And when you look at the just to take the annual budget, for example, how do you know in a agile 2-week sprint, lean startup, experiment and pivot world what that budget's going to be, right? And so the old way of trying to put your thumb up in the air and say, well, I think I'm going to need $2 billion to do whatever we want to accomplish, and then go fight for that, once a year and try to get the budget for that, it's just fundamentally out of step with the realities of these quick, iterative, adaptive startups that you're talking about.
One important point I want to cover for a non-tech company. So we've talked about, rapid innovation. There's also a talent shortage. What are your thoughts on for a non-tech company to either hire, their own development teams or outsource? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, my thoughts on that have evolved. Okay. And my previous company, I was able to hire, rock star programmers. And I think in the development world, one rock star is worth, 50 really good programmers. And so it's really critical that you develop a team that has these, just top talent. And you might be able to do that. And I was able to do that in my previous job. But it's really hard to keep them motivated because at some point, every app gets into legacy or maintenance mode, or the technology moves on. So, if you hire these rock stars that are great in technology X and something else comes along to replace that, they want to go to that, right? And so that reality led me to change my philosophy. Instead of trying to recruit and hire and staff a development team for the long haul, I look externally and I outsource my engineering team. And that way I can always kind of get the best of both worlds, I think. At least so far, I'm a couple years into this experiment. It seems to be working out really well. But that's a fundamental difference, I think, in how at least I've thought about in-house versus outside.
Yeah. The reason Skipless can retain the talent that it does is because we see so many different projects, and it's very easy for a developer to say, oh, I want to go work on this, and we see the opportunity for them to do it. But we're the edge case here, right? Where we're seeing hundreds of projects a year across, Fortune 500 startups. I've worked as a developer at a company, and you get bored after the first 6 months. You're like, this is not a fun project anymore. The code is done. I've solved the hard problems. And now it's like you said, maintenance mode. Maybe there's 1 or 2 cool features in the next 3 years, but you never quite get to those because you're always fixing customer problems. And it's, not exciting, especially, and there's always these enticing companies, these recruiters reaching out to you like, oh, I got the cool new stack. I got the cool new apps. Come work over here. We'll give you a Mac. And you're like, oh, well, I don't want to use this Windows PC anymore. Sorry, company A, I'm out. And it's nearly impossible for non-traditional tech companies to compete. I mean, on top of that, right, it's the equity structures people are giving out to developers these days is borderline insane. And yet, traditional non-tech companies and giving equity out to developers because they have to retain their value generators, right? Which are never developers.
Andrew, I got a question for you. Why do engineers get bored so quickly? I mean, what happened to just old school grinding it out? Why do engineers keep wanting to jump around?
It's a really great question. And, I have an old school mentality. You both know that. And I'm like grinding things out, but you get bored. Your brain sees the same problem every day. You're training your brain for 4-6 years over a lifetime to see problems and solve them. But if you're not seeing problems, your brain isn't active and you feel like you're falling behind, right? You're not seeing the same problems everyone else is doing. You're not making an impact right? And so depending on your personality, it's very easy to say, well, I'm not solving the problems I want to solve because there aren't too many problems anymore. My brain's not as active. I'm not growing. And if you have a growth mindset, that kills you. And, work isn't too exciting and I get paid more somewhere else. So there's really no incentive. The industry itself does it to itself, right? When people say I can't retain top talent, it's because the entire tech industry is backwards, right? In how we push people to leave. And that benefits startups, right? That means, startups can get top people for 2 or 3 years at a time. They might go to Google or Facebook eventually, but you can get top people. Other industries, they're very, very static. Employment contracts cause people to stay at jobs for 4 or 5 years. And we just don't have that in our industry because people wouldn't sign them. I truly think in the next 5 or 6 years, people will start moving more towards the traditional model of employment and things will be a little less insane. But right now it's the Wild West and developers can demand a lot more because it's a buyer or it's a seller's market. And you get to pick where you want to work on the projects you want to work. And there isn't any, it used to be on your resume, if you had a bunch of 2-year stints at jobs, people looked at you like you were insane. Now it's like, oh, 2 years, that's great. That's fantastic. At least it's not 5 9-month jobs, right? It's a different field, different mindset. People are a lot more relaxed than they used to be.
Yeah, my short version answer to that, Fahad, would be supply and demand. Right now, developers are the people that are in demand, and as long as there's such an imbalance in those two, you're going to have this situation. And I do agree with Andrew. It will correct.
Yeah.
Cool. I have one final question, and we'll kind of wrap it up. So, Michael, you're in the people business, and you've mentioned go where the puck is going. We always like to ask our guests kind of their thoughts on the future. Where do you think the puck is going in the people business?
In the people business, well, I think a lot of the technology trends that you're seeing, robotics and AI and machine learning and all these kinds of things, are going to make repetitive things and eliminate a lot of jobs. It might take a while, but I think that's a trend, an inescapable trend. And one of the great things about the business we're in is representing creative talent. And I think that's always going to be a unique thing that will be immune for the most part from technology. There'll be different platforms or canvases for storytelling or creative development or things like that. But I see, our company evolving to represent whoever those artists are in whatever medium that is. And, maybe someday we'll represent developers. We already do to some degree, like game developers and things like that. It's just wherever that, whether it's augmented reality or virtual reality or whatever the creative platform is, we want to be there and we want to, represent them. We're doing that now with podcasts and esports and, kind of digital influencers. And so there's only 24 hours in a day. And when it comes to entertainment, the what that is evolving, and you're really looking at eyeball share on typically a screen. And I think that we're in a great position to represent whoever those artists are in whatever medium they're at. So that's a people business.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. Like if you think about like agents versus, working with clients. That interaction, I think, is just going to get stronger, and we'll be able to automate a lot of the work that they do underneath. Like, for us, like sending out contracts or something like that, that could be completely automated. It gives me more time, to, work, person to person. And I think this idea that you can fully automate it and make it like a self-service, business is not going to happen anytime soon, but it'll be just about making our lives a little bit easier and working with people a lot more.
The platforms in which media is distributed on and probably influencing the most, right? Like sports is quickly moving away from physical sports as a popular source of medium to Twitch and esports. And you're seeing people not go to the theaters anymore. They are home watching Netflix. And so people are willing to almost start shipping their blockbusters through Netflix and through the other platforms to get that disbursement. Still big things like Avengers that are going to make billions of dollars still go through the theater because it's still profitable for them. But as it becomes less and less profitable for these other things, so you're going to see a complete shift in the underlying platform, which will change the way things are represented too. I mean, ebooks, everything's going digital. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects how representation and all that happens.
Bits versus atoms. As I look out at kind of what's next, and we talked about kind of shifts from, on-premise to the cloud and from, virtualization to containers and things like that. The shift from DevOps and CI/CD and really trying to make, faster, more integrated. For me, when I took what used to be a development silo and an operations silo and put them together, not only did things get a lot faster, but the accountability really went up a lot, because the same guys who wrote the code are the ones that got paged at 3 a.m. to fix it. And that does wonders for code, as opposed to kind of trying to force QA onto them. And now when I look at new technologies like serverless or no-ops, they seem to really hone that direction. And I'm just curious, Andrew, what your thought is on whether serverless and no-ops will really be the next thing, or it will just be kind of niche-y.
So this is a classic thing that's going to happen. You can observe it over the span of 10 years, where someone doesn't invest enough in technology and then can't take advantage of probably one of the best things that's ever going to happen to you. And no-ops is one of those things. If you've been investing in getting yourself into virtualization and then the cloud and then VM, or then Docker containers and Kubernetes, you're now ready to take the next step, which is getting rid of ops altogether. What I mean by that is Amazon and their hosted Kubernetes, just as an instance, or Google or Azure, they both have the same offering, can provide you 5 nines of uptime as long as you're deploying there. Well, there are tools that help you automate your deployment to Kubernetes in one click. So that's already taken, and that's another service that offers you 5 nines because it's running on Google or some other cloud. And then the database are managed too, because you can run Amazon RDS or Dynamo or whatever, and that's another 5 nines. And so now your entire stack manages itself, and all you have to do is write code. And that's no ops, right? You could be deploying to Lambda, and you don't have to go put a Kubernetes. That's even higher level. And so you're completely, as long as your code compiles and it's well tested, so it will, you're good, and it just deploys. And so if you're already at that point, congratulations, you can fire your ops team. And your developers can be a lot happier. They're going to be focused on just problem solving, which is what you want them to do anyways.
Is there any kind of analogy to the kind of third world countries that never built out landlines and went straight to cell phones and mobile technologies? Is there a possibility for a company that's been a laggard that hasn't kind of kept up to just leapfrog?
Well, so there are a lot of people thinking, I'm going to throw away what I have and I'm going to rewrite it. And I always caution people against that. Companies like ours tend to profit a lot from those, like those $5 million big bang rewrite situations. If there's no legacy software and this is your first foray into software, absolutely start there. There's no reason not to. You reduce the amount of technological maturity that you need and push that off into the cloud provider's hands, which is always smart anytime you can do that. But if you have existing technology, it might not run in Docker, right? If you have a legacy WinForm application, it's not going to run in Docker. And you don't want to see what happens when you try to run Citrix in Docker. So in that way, I would say for some people, yes. For others that have already existing technology stacks, there is ways to get there quicker. And if that's the way you want to go, you can always retrofit your old technology. Although, you have to look at it, right? It's possible. But it's a case-by-case basis.
I think that's a great place to end. Oh, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.